Oh, hello there! Welcome everybody to another episode of Is It Worth It? Where I review books across all genres, letting you know which are worth your time. Couldn't be more excited about today's book review, and I mean that wholeheartedly because today we're talking about one of my all-time favorite reads. This is not a knee-jerk reaction because I finished the book last night. No, I'm talking about the series, particularly the first book in the series, which has been on my mind for months. I wanted to do this review when I was talking about my favorite reads of 2020, but if you saw my review of The Priory of the Orange Tree, I mentioned that the book in question was going to get its own review when I finished the second in that series, so I was going to, at that point, default to The Priory of the Orange Tree as my favorite read. But after finishing the first two books in this trilogy, I have to say, this was my favorite read of 2020. So I take it back. This is it. This is the best one that I read. That, of course, as you can see prominently displayed, is The Name of the Wind, aka the first book in the Kingkiller Chronicle. The second in that series, the one that I finished last night and waited to do this book review for, is The Wise Man's Fear. The Name of the Wind, The Wise Man's Fear, and the forthcoming third book in the trilogy, The Doors of Stone, follow Kvothe, our primary protagonist throughout this entire chronicle. The story is told over a 3-day span in present day, as Kvothe chronicles his life basically. He tells most of this as a memoir, and we get his past from the viewpoint of somebody who has lived and done both heroic and horrible things. He has an extremely captivating, if not tragic, upbringing. All of those elements and stories lead to him attending the university. The university is known mostly for its teachings of magic, but it also has a lot of practical uses such as medicine and whatnot that help people in this world and that are vital and necessary, really. As we hear from Kvothe, who again is at this point a god-like man in the eyes of many, we see that he is not necessarily the person people have thought him or claimed him to be, and this in part is by his own design. We see this in the present day interludes that author Pat Rothfuss has presented in a third person narrative, which takes up about 10% of the novel. But important stuff does happen in these interludes, stuff that is definitely going to come into play, especially in the third novel. However, most of the story is told in that memoir-esque format, which is told from the first person and really gets us some interesting storytelling techniques that I didn't think an author would be able to pull off until reading this book, and I have to say I'm thoroughly impressed. With that said, that is not the most impressive part of Pat Rothfuss's writing. I cannot stress this enough. This book has the most well-written prose I have ever read. Ever. I'm talking with fantasy greats such as Robin McKinley. I'm talking all-time greats. F. Scott Fitzgerald. The beauty in what Rothfuss's elegant writing evokes, I could only hope to mirror half of his talent when writing my own stuff. If you know me at this point, you know how big of a fan I am of evocative writing, and my gosh, he is just the master, at least in the fantasy genre. He's so good at it that he's only written 2 books, and people consider him one of the best fantasy writers of all time. I'm not just saying that. This is a thing in the fantasy community. It's really flat out stunning what he's been able to do with just 2 books under his belt. I even wanted to see if I was the only one who thought that his writing was this good, so I looked it up, and yes, like I said, this is a thing. This is something that people talk about. Just his absolutely elegant prose and his style and the way that he's able to weave words together being second to none. I read some reviews that said that he has mediocre writing abilities and that some of it's even cringy. I guess people are entitled to their own opinions. My opinion is that they are more than wrong. That is incorrect. He is an incredible narrator when it comes to writing and the understanding of the English language. From a plot/comp comparison, this is Harry Potter for adults. You like Harry Potter? You're probably gonna like this story. I'm not saying that in terms of what happens in the story. They're nothing alike, but it involves a boy attending a magical university where stuff happens. Yeah, it's Harry Potter for adults. There's professors, some of which you love, some of which you hate. There's other students, some of which you love, some of which you hate. There's not necessarily spells, but bindings that make this magic system complex, but understandable. It's not difficult to catch on to what's happening, despite Rothfuss's ability to explain it so well. Basically, this story just makes sense. It makes sense. You're never confused, but you're also always asking questions. It's a great blend. It's something that a lot of writers have trouble doing. I myself am one of them. I've seen so many times in fantasy authors taking hundreds of pages to really grip a reader because it takes that long to allow them to know what's going on in their world. But from page one, I kind of got it in The Name of the Wind. That's special. That's really special. It's very difficult to pull off, especially when the world has nothing, no connection to the one that you're living in. This also relates to Kvothe's character, because something I really liked about the structure behind his method of storytelling is how he's able to let Kvothe do things without any context that leaves readers puzzled, and you never question why he did it that way. You almost envy him for being able to do it. It's maddening for a writer to try to figure out how to structure both foreshadowing and the presentation of necessary information. Rothfuss just does it, and it works so well. I'm smiling because it is crazy how well it works. Kvothe just does things, and you're like, huh, why is he doing that? There's no indication that he wanted to do that in the first place. And when it's explained, you're like, got it. I've never read a book that does that. That's so hard to do, especially in a first-person narrative where you're constantly in the person's mind, so you're getting their thoughts and their wants and desires non-stop. But he does it, and it works. Maybe part of this is because of the just amount of layers that he has here. This book is full of layers. In fact, I would say that the only fantasy series I've ever read that has the same amount of layers, and I'm talking macro and micro. I'm talking from our antagonist, both the kind of looming great threat to the antagonist at the actual university with Kvothe, and all of those in between, to the love interests of Kvothe, to simply Kvothe's wants and desires and goals in life. The only story that has the amount of layers that can rival this is A Song of Ice and Fire, A Game of Thrones. That story, as many people know, is as deep and as layered as it gets, and The Name of the Wind and the Kingkiller Chronicle absolutely rival it. It's really surprising that he's able to do that too, because this is a trilogy. A Song of Ice and Fire is a 7-book series. George R. R. Martin has a lot more time to develop those concepts than Rothfuss does, but man, he's able to do it, and he's able to do it in a first-person narrative so effectively and efficiently, and that's probably the big word here, is that he's very efficient in the way that he presents new themes, elements, and just his overall focus for the narrative. I know I'm sitting here praising Rothfuss as the god of writing that he is, because he really is something special to this genre. There is no surprise, to me at least, why so many critical sites have put The Name of the Wind in their top 5, top 10 fantasy books of all time. It's already there for me too. But he's not perfect. No writer is. I think that one of the things he struggles with is writing women. Similarly to how Samantha Shannon, as I mentioned in the Prior of the Orange Tree review, struggles writing men a little bit. And that is why I think she only has one male perspective in the Prior of the Orange Tree versus multiple female perspectives. Rothfuss takes this one step further and just doesn't give us any female perspectives. A lot of this is because this is told in a first-person narrative 80% of the time, but even in those interludes, there's no female characters. Rothfuss understands that he is not a master of the female mind. He much more gets a male's perspective, and therefore he's able to present that in a much more believable way. But I also think that some of the women that are present in this story are really not believable. The reason for there being so few women in this story does make sense, and he does make that very evident and plain early on, so we get it. But when they are there, they come across often as damsels in distress. They come across as too stubborn for their own good, even a little bitchy, too bitchy, like just over the top. Not all women are like this. Simply put, you gotta have some variety in there. And he does. There are some women I think that are done relatively well, but overall they are not nearly as well developed as the men, which makes me fear that women trying to get into this series will not enjoy it nearly as much as men. Kvothe's relationship with women is a big part of the series, especially the second novel, but his relationship with music is really his true love. That is something that is established early on and continually referenced throughout the entire narrative. And because it's such a huge part of the story, and because Rothfuss is such a beautiful writer, I was a little surprised at the lack of connection I felt to the songs written. If we're sticking to the Game of Thrones comp, there are no Rains of Castamere or The Bear and the Maiden Fair. These memorable tunes that you're going to create music for in your own head and feel excitement about the possibility of a live adaptation's version of them, similar to how Game of Thrones did that on HBO. I don't even remember some of the songs, most of the songs in this story. There's only one that really sticks out to me, and that's because Rothfuss makes it a point to mention it over a dozen times. It's not because it's necessarily good. He's a good poet. There are poems in this story that work very well, but musical writing, not necessarily something I connected with, which was surprising given the importance of music to the narrative. You also keep hearing me distinguish book 1 and book 2. This is because, to me, book 1 is flawless. I say that wholeheartedly. I wouldn't change a thing about book 1. Book 2 is a more than worthy sequel to this book. The prose is still perfectly balanced, incredibly eloquent, but it's very long. Book 1 is under 700 pages. It's a quick read for something so epic. Book 2 is 1,000 pages, and we could have cut 100 of them out of the middle. I think when you read it, you'll know exactly where I'm talking about. I mean, the beginning of this book is fast-paced. The very end of this book is fast-paced, but that middle-ish part slogs at times. And I just didn't see the point of some of the writing. Maybe I'll change my mind when I read the third book, but as of right now, this book did not need to be 1,000 pages long. 900 would have been more than enough. Also, I'm not sure if this is a negative remark or a question, but how the hell is this man going to finish this series in one more novel? Especially if it's going to be less than 1,000 pages, as he's on the record saying. Godspeed, man. No wonder this has taken 10 plus years to complete. My mind hurts trying to comprehend how he can do this, because while book 1 makes this feel like a true trilogy, book 2 it blows the doors off and makes this seem like we're shooting for 5 books here. Audible check-in time. I brought this up last week for the first time, In the Eye of the World, a book I strongly recommend on Audible. Name of the Wind. Tried it 5 years ago. Hated it on Audible. Couldn't stand the narrator. He's not Kvothe. Not to me. I stopped halfway through, never thought I'd pick it up again, only tried it because somebody told me how good it was and how much I was missing. Wow, I was wrong when I was doing this on Audible. Outstanding as a read, not as an Audible book. I could be in the minority. I checked on Audible to see if other people felt the same way, and the performance has a 4.7 out of 5 rating with 80,000 reviews. So if you're short on time and you're not necessarily a quote-unquote eyes-to-page reader, maybe try it, because the book is that good. But the narrator certainly was not for me. However, the book is absolutely worth it, especially The Name of the Wind. My favorite read of 2020, perhaps my favorite read of all time. It's that great in every aspect I can possibly think of. Book 2 is even a worthy sequel. It's still very good. It's not quite as good as book 1, but then again, I don't know a fantasy novel that is. Thanks a lot for joining me today, guys. I'm so happy I could do this review with you. To find out whether more books are worth your time, definitely check my Instagram and YouTube channel, subscribe, and click a like if you enjoyed this video. Really appreciate it. I'll see you guys soon.